From Belsky will speak about Beit Yosef Shechita.
The interest in Beit Yosef Shechita recently was accentuated, aroused very much because of the increased big of many Ashkenazi groups and individuals to try to procure a special Shechita which is called Beit Yosef Shechita, and therefore discussing this is quite important. It's important for everyone. It's Sephardim, Ashkenazim. So, let me first explain what it's all about. The dinim of the Dika Survey, checking the loan in Simon Monates and Shiznorach, discusses many of the laws of Sirchus. By loan we often find it's extremely common. In fact, most of the laws have somewhat occasional sircha, many of them are covered by sirchas. And these are lesions, little pieces of tissue that hang from the lung, and most of the time connect the lung to the chest wall, or to the one lobe of the lung to the other of the lobe. The lung has 8 different parts. A lung of cattle. There are parts called unois, ears. There are parts called umois, larger lobes. Either bisa, varga, the belly of the lung. And there are many times lesions, surface that connect these parts one to another and to the chest wall where the ribs are or further down. And the halachas are very complicated. If we were to reject every single one of these animals, it would leave us with very little meat to eat. 20%, 30% sometimes more of the animals that are available for sheep. And throughout this long and complicated section of Shulchan Aruch, we have the different opinions and decisions of what we're allowed to take and what we're not allowed to take. On one extreme, there's thick and heavy sirchus that are deeply attached to the flesh of the lung, and make these parts of the lung attached to the wall of the animal. At the other end, there are little tiny sirchus that just fall apart when your finger touches them as your hand passes through the chest cavity. I'll explain what this means. Twice the lung is examined in every single animal. Once right after the Shechita. And the animal is positioned where the diaphragm, which separates the chest cavity from the intestinal cavity, is still complete. If the animal is hanging down with its head to the floor and its tail upwards, so you see to it to cut open the abdomen and remove the intestines, the stomach, and the diaphragm. The tarpush, as it's called, Torah calls it the Aseres HaKaved, according to most Rishonim. And the diaphragm is slit, a little slit on the right, a little slit on the left, and the expert, the boydek, puts his hand into each slit and checks blindly the right side, checks the left side, and runs his fingers all around the parts of the lung and marks off on a little map where, if any, the circuits exist and how they're connected, on which particular place they're connected to the different parts or to the chest wall. Then he cuts them very carefully at the part where they're connected to the wall, leaving as much of the circuit there as possible so that it could be examined later on. Then the animal's slit open. The breastbone, the sternum, is cut through, and the lung is removed, and the lung is placed on a table. A second examination, called the Bedikas Chutz, is made by another boydek who looks at it very carefully. In most cases, will blow up the lung, and in some places it's a minute to blow up all the lungs, and checks it to see if there's a shinui mara, a change in color, and perhaps he'll re-examine the circuits to see if they're acceptable. And in a moment I'll tell you what he's looking for and how he examines it. Now, in each community, the community of the Beit Yosef, which the Sfardim have certain kulas, and in the community of the Armah, the Ashkenazim, have other kulas. The Mechaber approves of a number of different kulas. Number one, he says that the bodik could place his hand inside and run it through the chest cavity very quickly, without any force, but not just perfectly lightly, and whatever splits apart and falls away in the hands of the bodik chutz, or bodik men, rather, whatever falls away is discounted. He also says that the bodik, who's a Shamayim and could be trusted to be extremely careful, could place his finger onto the surface, again by the Bdikas Pnim. And if the circuit peels off very easily, tries to lift it up, and if he could lift it up just through putting the finger there, that's also acceptable. Putting the finger in, lifting it up very, very gently and very slightly. And then he says something else, that the upper half of the lung, the 5 different lobes from the sides, which are called unois, ears, if they're attached to the rib cage, and they're attached to the flesh between the ribs, even if they're attached to the ribs as well, in that case, they don't count at all, and they're acceptable, and we just discount these circles. In these, the last of these cases, which is extremely common, the Ramah says that we don't accept it. By Ashkenazim, we consider these to be regular circles and treat them like we treat all other circles, even if they're where the rib cage is and they're attached to the flesh between the ribs. And the other 2 kulas he doesn't comment on, so ostensibly you can put your hand through the rib cage very quickly, and whatever falls away is acceptable. In practice, no one does those first 2 kulas. Today's boykin do not put their hands in and flip it around quickly, nor do they put their finger between the serpent and the lung, and they don't look at those at all. There's another issue, though, which is more well known to the public, more famous, and that's the issue, what we call glatt kosher. And that is that when you see the sircha, after it's detached from the wall and after it's laying on the table of the bodek chutz, then the bodek will take it between his fingers and squeeze it. If it falls apart, then he could accept it. That's called miuchu mishmush. The source for this is from the Goinim. And the Rosh brings down a story that happened at the time of the Goinim, and it was accepted by the whole world at that time. The other one is what's more commonly done today, which is called kiluf. And that's peeling off the sircha. If it peels off very easily, then if the skin is smooth, you blow up the lung and you examine it like you examine a tire. It's a flat. You put water over there and see if there's any bubbling. Sometimes it's necessary to put the whole thing into a tank of water. Sometimes, and most of the time, it can be accomplished by cupping the bodek's hand around the place where the sircha was and allowing it to fill up with water. There's always a shower head where the bodek is standing. He presses the pedal and the water falls into his hand, and he sees if there's any bitsputs, which means if there's bubbling. If there's none, it passes. The Mechaber, the Beit Yosef, says that we don't do it. It's not acceptable. Not miuchu mishmush, and it's assumed that he disagrees with the Kibbutz as well. In Ashkenazi communities, there were people who were medagdek and did, when it came to this halacha, like Sfardim, and refused to accept miuchu mishmush, squeezing the sircha, and refused to accept kiluf as well. Those people who didn't accept it considered to be that they ate glatt kosher. Glatt means smooth. Of course, today it's come to mean the extra special high level of kashrus. They serve in airplanes glatt kosher cream cheese and all kinds of things. Glatt kosher chicken, there's nothing to talk about, of course, it's meat, but there's no such thing. Glatt means only animals, meat of animals which have lungs that are expected, and if it's still smooth without any surface, without any lesions on the lung, then it's called glatt kosher. In Europe, there were very, very few yichidim, maybe one or two in a town, that would eat glatt kosher. Everyone else would take the animal, if the surface were removed very carefully and there was no bubbling, no bitsputs. Here in America, historically, it came to be the standard of most primitive, even most religious Jews, and there's a history that explains why. It was early in the century, and in the 1800s as well. The Shechita was carefully controlled by the unions. And you couldn't dictate to the union what they should do and how they should be boidik, who should be the shachar, who should be the boidik. And most often, if you had a shachar that was a Yerei Shamayim, so the boidik wasn't. Or the opposite. And it was practically impossible to get meat that you could rely on, and people sometimes didn't eat meat. The idea came to some people about 100 years ago that perhaps we could set aside a new category, in a new class of meat, they call it glatt kosher, and say that this is something entirely different. Over here, in order to be called glatt, it has to have a shochet who's designated as a glatt shochet, and boidik who's designated as a glatt boidik. And in this way, they overcame the control of the unions and were able to sell glatt kosher, and it wasn't just that the circus weren't accepted. That was the least of the concerns. The glatt kosher provided kosher meat, both the shochet and the boidik were Yirei Shamayim. And of course, no one is machshir shachtem who are not Yirei Shamayim and boidik who are not Yirei Shamayim. And it made meat available to people who were medagdik and kashrus. And because of that, it wasn't just 1 in 100, but it was a tremendous percentage of Ashkenazim who ate glatt kosher. Now, it's assumed that glatt kosher will accept certain circles. Which circles? Very light ones, very thin ones. And they come off within a second or two, and only if there are a few of them. If there are 2 or 3, no more than that. That's accepted as glatt kosher. The truth is that probably most of those circles would be accepted by the Mechaber, by the Sfardim as well. Why? Because if the person would do like the Mechaber, so the Aruch says, to put his hand in the chest cavity and foot it around quickly and firmly, so those circles would come right off. Maybe there would be 1 or 2 out of 100, which the Mechaber would be more machmir, but most likely that's what would happen. And in fact, if people would follow the Mechaber, there would probably be a higher percentage, because a good amount of the circles are in the Meisar HaChozeh, the narrow part of the chest cavity, which is where the rib cage is, and where all the circles that's acceptable to the Mechaber are found. This is the way it is. Just to review very quickly, the Mechaber has the kulas of putting the finger under, waving the hand around, and circles that are attached to the meat between the ribs and the chest cavity, which are acceptable. The Mechaber, the Ramor has that you could make miyuch mishmush, and it's accepted. Some Sefer speaks about it, that kiluf is also acceptable. It's this point which separated Ashkenazim from Sfardim. The Ashkenazim would accept the Ramor's kula in miyuch mishmush and kiluf, and the Sfardim wouldn't. What about the Sfardim who eat glatt kosher? Well, the Ashkenazim rather who eat glatt kosher. Is it the same as the Shechita Beit Yosef, or is it different? People from time to time write little contradictions saying it's all the same, and they'll tell you that as far as they understand from having learned the halacha, it's all the same, but it's really not, because the experts on this are the shachtim themselves. The shachtim who annoy the Shechita Beit Yosef just don't accept, and even the small circles, unless they're just very, very light, and they flip out in an instant without any attention. If there's anything more than that, they don't consider it Shechita Beit Yosef. So there is a little percentage difference between what's accepted as glatt kosher and a couple of percentage points less, which were accepted as Shechita Beit Yosef. Now, some who learn Shulchan Aruch are afraid that if we Ashkenazim accept Shechita Beit Yosef, then you'll be getting the kulas at the end of the siman as well. You'll be accepting circles which attach the lung to the rib cage. But anyone who's worried about that can be assured that that the Sephardi Shoftim are knowing all the chumras in Sidon test, and not going to any of the gulas of the Beit Yosef. When it comes to the not accepting sirchas that attach belong to the chest cavity, as far as I don't accept it as well, as far as I know, I have, it was my interesting experience to be the representative of the Rabbanut for 5 years. And I flew all over the country, and I was with the Tzvatot that came from Beit Yisroel, and those are groups, and the Tzvatot were always pretty much, from one cut, either all Ashkenazim or Sephardim. In fact, we go a little deeper, all Hasidic, all all Taimanim. That's the Tzvatot were made to be a socially unified group. They should get along with each other. They were here for a couple of months, and then they went back with a couple of dollars in the package. They could marry a child or do something. So it was paid very well for them to get away from home and come back with the little bit of enrichment. Now, the kulas were never practiced. As far as I know, I've seen it with my eyes time and time again. By the Sephardi Tzvatot. So it comes out that the person who eats Shchitat Beit Yosef is definitely compliant with all the chubris of their amor in the entire Simon one test. And as far as Glat Kosher, in our Shchitas in the OU, we definitely try very hard. You can't be 100% successful. We have Shachtim Oyer Shamayim and everything, but occasionally there would be a Shechita who might accept something as being Glat Kosher, and it may not be Shchitat Beit Yosef. So it would be Kedai for Sephardim to look specifically for Shchitat Beit Yosef, so that anyone's view would match with the most stringent advocates. In Baruch Hashem, the hashgacha on these shchitas and the extendeds that are used when the gedikas are made are of the highest caliber. We don't have those kind of shachtim that the unions pushed into us many, many years ago. It happens to be that every shachit that I've come across is a big Yerushalayim. Every voidek is, it's not seen as a profession that we go and make a living from. And I believe, years ago, in Brooklyn, there were Shechita. In fact, when I was a bocher at the yeshiva, a couple of blocks away, 69 Johnson Avenue in Greenpoint, there was a big Schlachtois, there's dozens of shachtim working, and they shechted animals. Boys who wanted to learn Yeridea would go down there once or twice just to observe and see everything as it's done. In Manhattan, you had places, west of the 13th Street over there with the meat section. And in fact, there were big cattle farms, believe it or not. On the border of Brooklyn and Queens, there was a cattle farm that had 400 cows. And they milked it. Old Yisroel Milk, Balsam's farm, was there in Brooklyn and Queens. I was there myself, and it was a Chalmai trip just to go down with the family, buying the cows there in the middle of the Mississippi. None of this is survived. There's no shchitas. And what's more, for many, many years, till recently, there were many shchita in New Jersey, right across the river, dotting the whole border of New Jersey, Linden, Jersey City, Newark, one after another. these two disappeared. There's nothing left. And in order to be a shochet, then you have to have a little Mesiras Nefesh to get up and go away for days and weeks at a time sometimes. Otherwise, you can't really be a shochet. And someone who's not a Shemayim is definitely it's easy to find all kinds of other professions without such difficulty. Whereas a Shemayim who wants to do something, so he'll do this. And now, I'll address very briefly some of the questions that were asked. May a Sephardic Jew eat at an Ashkenazi catered affair or in an Ashkenazi restaurant? Well, if he only wants to eat Shechita Beit Yosef, you should order chicken or fish. And, or perhaps if there are enough Sephardim, the Simcha, the one who prepares the affair, if it's at an affair that he's eating, so it should be told that they should order Shechita Beit Yosef. But if not, then they really shouldn't. Because, despite the fact that I told you that the standards are very often the same, and at worst there's a few percentage points of difference, but there are. So a person should, he could nevertheless, there are restaurants that order it. You have to check with the restaurant, Ashkir, and find out what is acceptable to that restaurant. I would definitely assume if there's something in a section where there are many Sephardim who look for Shechita Beit Yosef, then that's the thing they should look for. What about the opposite? Could an Ashkenazi eat in a Sephardi restaurant? Well, the answer is they could, because the Sephardim are knowing all the chumras of the Ashkenazi. That's something that came in a question. Over here, I am Ashkenazi, am I allowed to eat Sephardi Shechita? And yes, Sephardi Shechita employs all the chumras of both stories. Again, it has to be in a place where they take it seriously. I've been to respectable shlachtais, and I was told that over here, everything is Shechita Beit Yosef. So I asked him, show me the people who do the Shechita, show me the people who do the Vedika. I'm very impressed. I'd like to speak with them and hear a wonderful story about it. And the answer was, there's no difference between Glat and between Shechita Beit Yosef. It's all the same. So whatever is Glat, we just label it Shechita. So I told him, I'm going to speak to the Rabbi and make sure that it stops, and furthermore, make sure that the whole world knows about it, unless it stops. And it's totally unfair to tell people we comply with your chumras, when in reality they comply with the authority in charge would say, with my vision, with my view of what your chumras should really be. Now, that kind of business. It's not up to the local authority to decide such things. So hopefully we wiped out that practice in recent years. I can't guarantee you 100%. It still may be, but I don't think so. We tried to have it that was advertised as Shechita Beit Yosef should be Shechita Beit Yosef completely according to the standards employed by the people who've been doing this over the years, and they know precisely what practices are acceptable and what are not acceptable. As I told you, though, in reality, if the practice of the Mechaber would be be conducted, there probably would be no difference, because the Hachnosis Yad HaBoidik into the chest cavity, which the Machaber speaks about, probably would cover all those little circles that are just in between blood kosh and Shechita.
I'd like to ask Rabbi Belsky if he could join the panel for the remaining questions. Okay, sure. Thank you. Rabbi Belsky from the Shira. Nice to ask Rabbi Genak, Rabbi Elephant to join us here on the panel. Chazal tell us, Potchin B'chvod Aksanya. We didn't do it earlier in the program, but now, more or less the formal part of the program, I'd like to give Rabbi Ben Chaim and the congregation, Sharei Tzion and B'nai Sharei Tzion, our Hakor Zatov for the warm acceptance and reception that he has given us to share Torah with you here this morning. And just a quick story that happened between Rabbi Ben Chaim and myself, that right before Purim, so I wished Rabbi Ben Chaim Purim Sameach, and he wished me a Freilich and Purim, and then he said, it's Mashiach time. I said, yes, we're brothers. And I think that's the feeling that Rabbi Ben Chaim gave to me. We met with him several times before and spoke to him very often, so it was real warmth that he accepted us into his kehillah, and for that we really express our appreciation. We have now the panel. You heard from Rabbi Belsky. In the center is Rabbi Menachem Genak. He is the CEO of OU Kosher and the rabbinic administrator. And to his right is Rabbi Moshe Elephant, who is the executive rabbinic coordinator and COO of OU Kashrus. We've had many questions. Unfortunately, a lot of people sent in questions without an email. If we don't answer your question, the only way we can respond is through an email. So we'll try to answer as many questions as possible. I'd like to begin with asking Rabbi Genak, what connections are there between OU Kashrut and the Sephardic community? Are there any plans in the future to enhance this relationship? And if you can elaborate on his recent visit with Chacham Ovadia together with Rabbi Elephant, tell us maybe some highlights of that visit as part of his answer.
Well, we've had a long-term relationship with the Sephardic community, and we try to cooperate on different issues that are important for them, both in the area of kashrus and beyond the area of kashrus. Let me just outline a few. When we visited Rabbi Yosef in our last visit to Israel, which was relatively recent, I think it was in January, whenever I go to Etzisol, I visit with Rabbi almost every single time. And through the Shechita that they've developed in Beit Yosef in Israel, they now want to try, for this community, to create their own Shechita here in the United States, and we've tried to accommodate them because almost every reliable Shechita in the United States is under the OU, and they've begun, or about to begin, a Shechita of offot, of poultry, chickens, and turkeys here in the United States, in an OU slaughterhouse. So, And we were sort of a shechita trying to accommodate in that issue. So Rabbi Belsky himself has been a very big promoter over a long period of time of trying to, create products that are available reliably, hopefully kidney. We have such a product which we do together with Moshe Yosef, with Elijah's son, which in Yisroel, a cracker with kidney. So that's some of the areas in kashrus field. I'll just give one, where there's actually a dispute within the Sephardi community. But when Mordechai Eliyahu was the chief rabbi, so the tuna that was coming into Israel was coming in, as it is still today, primarily was coming from Puerto Rico, and he said that he would like to see to it that tuna, which is cooked, would be a standard that would be acceptable for Sephardim as well, because as you know, there's a very basic machloket between the Machaber and the Ramah in terms of bishul akum, whether if the Ramah relies on the kula of Mordechai and Mishanim, that if the Jew participates in any way in fire, so he gets kisek with a slip of wood or chater b'cholim, he moved around the coals, or in our contemporary context, that there was a pilot light that the Jew lit, that would be sufficient for us. For Chaber, that's only that would only be good for Pas Akum, but not for Bishul Akum. So Mordechai Eliyahu asked if we could set up a system there that would accommodate Sephardim as well, which we did. Now it happens that I think that there are many things there that really would be good for Sephardim anyhow, because the way the fish comes in, it's smoked, not in smoke, but it's heated in steam, and actually that's the point where it's really delectable. It's subsequently cooked in a retort, but that's not to enhance the food quality, but it's really just to kill any potential microbes. So, and the Levazim is machlokes haposkim to any Rishonim, whether steam is to be subsumed under the category of pushing or smoking, which is permitted as relates to bishul akum. The Rabbi Yosef, interesting enough, in his chuvas says that steam is considered like a pushing. So we give with the videos of the Prophet bishul akum. But Mordechai Eliyahu had his own opinions about this, and so we want to accommodate him as well. So what we would do is that Mashkiach, who's in that plant, his name is Binyamin Gifted, he's with Mordechai Gifted. So that the Shiva tells his son, he would, move these enormous wagons, these agalot that had these cans of tuna into the retort, so it would be mamash bishul Yisroel. Whether that's required or not is that's what the Mordechai Eliyahu request. But the truth, that the steaming is if you see that it's not if
but it's after my site.
But it's not just based on what it's not cooked.
Not for the second season.
Retort is after the second.
You said retort, it's not retort. First comes the steam.
No. First is
the can.
The retort is not steam. The retort is not cooked.
Was it edible or wasn't edible?
It is edible.
It is edible.
Right.
And are you considering that cooking when you're not cooking it?
That's the question.
That's the question.
But the steaming is accomplished in a steam room, they call it. And the rack is pushed in. And that's where the edibility, that's where the cooking takes place. Then it's put in the can, cooked the second time. Recooked the second cooking.
I just want to focus on one issue, which is an interesting issue. That is, the Rabbi Yosef writes his Jews, it's based on the Abinazar, that if the, let's say you put, Abinazar says like this, you put a pot of chom, a pot of meat on a fire, and then the Jew lights the fire. That's so Rabbi says, according to this Abinazar, that's not just cooking. That's not just, it's not just cooking, right? That's not just that he lit the fire. Because by lighting the fire, he's like, and our magazine, which we published from the OU, we have a lot of junk on the server, so we have a tshuva there from Rashi Daron, who also confirms that position. And it's Milson's 12, makes sense. However, Mordechai Eliyahu, he didn't rely on that, even though it really makes a lot of sense. So what we used to do to accommodate him, Foldo, as I said, that Rabbi Gifter would push these into the oven as well. So that's just an example of an accommodation of working together. But the relationship goes beyond simply kashus, because there are many issues of mutual concern that we work closely with some of the representatives of the Islamic community. I want to mention one, because this is the new president of the OU, his name is Simcha Cancer. This is actually his signature issue that he wants to deal with, and that is the crisis of the yeshiva tuitions. And we know that a lot of the initiatives of council, especially in terms of the Israeli community, Sukkot and others, have been very involved in terms of lobbying, especially in Berkeley, to try to get state and federal aid for yeshivas, increase the amount. And this is an issue that we've been working together with them. And I should say a very broad coalition public, because it is a crisis of enormous proportions that affects our entire community. So the areas of contact and cooperation should hopefully extend beyond simply kashus.
Sure, Rabbi Genak. I'd like a number of questions on Belsky Shir, so maybe I'll say all of them if Belsky could answer them. Is all veal Beis Yosef? What about bison?
All veal is Beis Yosef simply because no one accepts any service by veal. What? Yeah, same thing. Maybe not. But large, mature sheep, which there is hardly any market for, then you accept service. But young animals, lamb and veal are not. We don't accept service at all, so there's really no difference. The Moshe Zatzal said like this, that early when they shechted veal, the big taste of drive to eat veal came out of the cause that really has nothing to do with people's tastes in meat. It happens to be that the meat industry is very, very integrated with the milk industry. You can't have a cow give milk for more than 18 months. The cow's milk is the mother's milk. And after that, the calf will be on its own, and the milk of the cow stops. It's like a human one. And because of that, they have to make the cow pregnant after 9 months, and the cow develops another calf. It takes 9 months, very close to a human being. And after about 5 months or 6 months, the milk stops. So it's about 15 months that the cow gives milk. And then there's a new calf after 3 months after that, and the cycle starts all over again. So in the milk areas, there's lots of new calves being born. So if the taste for veal, for cows, for full-size cattle drops, and it dropped very sharply about 15, 20 years ago, because there was a big public drive. People shouldn't eat red meat, it's not good, it contains cholesterol and all kinds of such things, but it's true, not probably. Most of that publicity is not true. But people stopped buying red meat. So they had to make sure to take the calves and slaughter them before they became cows, before they became large animals. Steers, cows, foreign calves. What happened was that they had many times an oversupply of milk. So how do you solve both problems? You have to keep the milk farms in business, keep producing calves, and thus keep producing steers, and the whole industry is going to go down into the showtime. So they developed what they call field barns. They feed the calves milk, only milk, plus a little fat, a few other vitamins, something. It's a diet without any iron. So the cows, the calves become anemic, and the meat is very close to white, and very soft, and very tender, and tastes like butter. And that caused a tremendous interest, and they have all these field barns all over central Ohio and other places where there's milk, so there's field barns. And they slaughter the field, and there's a big taste in the Jewish community as well as the non-Jewish community. People took to this meal, and they helped solve the economic problem of the integration of the cattle country. But initially, these field barns were faced with some very bad cruelty. They weren't well ventilated. They had the diet was not just poor in iron to keep the meat from becoming red, but it was poor in a whole bunch of other things. The calves were kept in little chambers that was hardly larger than the calf. They suffered, they groaned the whole time. It was the government began to regulate it very strongly. During this early period, because of the ill treatment of the calves, the rate of kosher animals coming out of there was 1%, 2%. It was extremely unusual to get something kosher. Even when they improved the condition of the calves, they still had low percentage. So Moshe was very long. He said that the reason why we're not voiding for all Yudchef Trefus, there's 18 Trefus, which really have 70, the Rambam's list ends at number 70. The reason why we're not voiding for all the Trefus is because we're Simon Road, the red vein is cherished. But now, that among these animals, because of the treatment they get, we don't have a Trefus, we have real Trefus. Also says that you find behemoths have circus and everything, but soft there is suffocation. But with the veal, it was much worse than that. People took Moshe's children very, very seriously, and during a certain period of time, they would boil animals from head to foot, just to find out what the situation is. And they found that there were no other treifas except the law. And once that was discovered, Moshe said if that's the case, then we just have to be boiling for long. So Moshe, the Seif Yom was in agreement that besides which I was in the field barns in Ohio after they made improvements, and it's a different world. The animals have more room, and the ventilation is watched over carefully by the government, and a lot of things. It's something that is acceptable to the government, and the animals have less typhus. And the reason why we have such a high rate of typhus is because on veal we don't accept any circus. That's all. It's because of our chumr, not because they were unhealthy and sickly. So that's what the situation is by veal. Well, what was it again? Is there one bison? Yeah. As far as bison goes, the bison has all the simanim of the kosher, it's malagir, it's kofar in the same exact manner as cattle. So nobody has the mesorah on bison, but almost every place they assume that you don't need a Messiah if you have Zivone Kashrus. To say that it's a chaya and that the fat of the lower half of the animal is kosher, that the chaylev is kosher by chaya, that we have to have a Messiah for, the Shach says. And we don't take it back down in quarters of bison, only take the 4 quarters. The only time we take the hindquarters is by deer, because by deer is definitely an animal with a Messiah. It was throughout the world people like deer and accepted the chaylev. The chaylev of the chayas moved it. By bison, we don't have a Messiah. It was only the Chazon Ish who held that you need a Messiah on a min of cattle as well. There was an animal in question which was called zebu. And the zebu is a cow that had a big hump near its neck, and because of that, Chazon Ish said it shouldn't be eaten because it has no Messiah. But the English that you need a Messiah on a kosher animal was not accepted by the group. So, even by Chazal tell us many times that that something is not the Sugi of the Alma, the world didn't accept it. And today, by the way, 3/4 of the cattle that we eat is, especially in Yisroel, where it's 95%, it's all interbred with zebu, so you can't get away from that before. What? Whatever they accept it, they accept it.
It's not like people that they don't accept it. They accept it.
Accept circuit, but there's such little demand for it.
All the bikes are constructing and they
Yes,
so little construction that they want to make sure that you accept it for that entire community. There's really only one place to check in bikes and they're barely checking anything.
And they want to increase the market. They said,
Venison for Belsky, that's what she.
yeah. No, the venison that we chef is mostly by almost about musical.
Is it Beit Yosef?
They don't accept any service. But he has the same, Musicon has the same problem. He's not selling too many, and he can afford to pay the slightest circuit. They're young animals, and so they're probably in the same category as field. They're all young. The large the elks, the huge red deer, they don't accept it.
Rav Shechita, before he left, told me that even though it was discussed earlier, this next topic, in case there were some people who came in late, he felt it's important they should hear it. So I'm going to ask the elephant to respond to a few questions about kitniyot. And the questions are as follows. Since Sephardic Jews do not have the minhag prohibiting kitniyot, legumes, can they eat all processed kitniyot foods or drinks, such as rice products or coke without the OUP kosher capacity label? What is meant by the OUP kitniyot certification? Third question, I have heard that the OU will, upon request, provide information as to whether a product has a chametz-free status. Please explain how this differs from the OU kitniyot certification. And finally, what can a consumer do to have more products received from the OU's kitniyot certification?
A lot of questions to remember. More?
No, the Arabic kashas.
Well, there are 4 questions, but there's really one answer to all of the 4 questions. And that is the OU, specifically under the leadership of Rabbi Belsky and Rabbi Genak, and as Rabbi Genak referred to earlier, when we were in Yisroel and we met with Rabbi Yosef, strongly urged us to try to help our brothers from the Sephardi community who have the minhag that they do eat kitniyot, at least most Sephardim, as we understand, do eat kitniyot on Pesach. And to be quite frank, it comes this time of the year, you could imagine the OU phones are inundated with calls. We get hundreds and hundreds of calls on a daily basis. And many of the questions that we get are from people in the Sephardi community who feel that they've been ignored by the mainstream hashgachas, particularly the OU, and therefore assumptions are made and questions are asked based on those assumptions, assuming that if we ignored you, then therefore you can make your own decision if a product is just kitniot, not just chametz, and therefore maybe consumed if you don't have the meaning of kitniot. I have to respectfully tell you that that is incorrect. And just to give you a number of examples. The most common example, frankly, is rice. Because rice, Ashkenazim don't eat rice, therefore you will not typically find an OUP certification on rice. And people who have the meaning that they do eat kitniot on Pesach feel, what could be with rice? Well, the law in the United States is that all rice that's sold in the United States must be enriched. Must be enriched. And the enrichments are vitamins and all sorts of vitamins that are very specific by the government which vitamins have to be included in your enriched rice. Interestingly, it's actually very much current events. One of the enrichments for most of the rice comes from Japan. And we have done an investigation on that enrichment and discovered that it's wheat-based. So although the rice itself isn't the kidneys, the enrichment, which is on every grain of rice, is chametz kamen, or certainly a strong question of chametz. And therefore, assuming that a product is kitniot, and then making the further assumption, because it's not available with a reliable hashgacha, we're going to make an assumption that it's kosher Pesach, is actually inaccurate. I just have to say, and I think this answers one of the questions that Rabbi Grossman mentioned. A number of years ago, again, Rabbi Belsky was speaking to me constantly about this. We have to do something for Achenu HaSfardim. Particularly, he was speaking to me about rice. So I spoke to one of the food distributors that we have a relationship with, to perhaps, if he would agree to have a package, a run of rice made, if it would be enriched, but not have this particular enrichment in it, where it would be a shiloh of chametz. And he told me he did. But then he told me that he had a salesman, I guess, come to this neighborhood where the stores, where this community shops from, and he said, here we have rice. It's certified by the OU L'Ochle Kitniot, and this is perfect. But he came back to me and he said that he was stuck with all the rice. Because the storekeeper said, no, we don't want just rice, we want Carolina rice. And this wasn't Carolina rice. It was obviously not that brand. So again, I think that the attitude has to somewhat be that, yes, we want to be able to help you, and we want to be able to certify products that are kosher, largely kitnius. But on the other hand, just like all the other foods that we certify all year round aren't available kosher Pesach. Obviously, you look at the hundreds of thousands of product that the OU certifies all year round, and then you look about the amount of products we certify for Pesach, it's just a fraction of that because they're just not certifiable, or the companies aren't interested in making special runs to Pesach. The same thing goes with kidneys, the same. We can do products that are kosher largely kidneys, but it has to be according to the standards. The standards would have to be that it's truly only kidneys or non-kidneys products with nothing chametz in it. The standard would be, as is the standard with the OU for all kosher Pesach product. Whenever you see a product that has the OUP on it, it means that it was made with a Mashiach community, and that standard would be in place for all kidneys as well. In fact, somebody mentioned we should even be more machmir, because we should make, if we're certifying it locally kidney, we should also make sure that it's officially Yisroel according to the standard of the Mechaber. Again, I can't think of any situation where that would be necessarily relevant, but it's a fair point. But the issue really comes, to answer one of the questions that Gross proposed, well, where does it begin? It begins here. It begins here. It begins by the community recognizing that products are not just, because they don't have the OEP, it shouldn't be assumed that, well, it's not just for Pesach, but it's fine lawfully kidney. I can tell you every year, I wish I had $1 for every time the OU gets this call. Many people may have the assumption that Hellman's mayonnaise is really kosher Pesach. The only problem with it is kidneys. It's not true. Talmud's mayonnaise is chametz. And to make that assumption based on looking at an ingredient panel is incorrect. It's just incorrect. But again, if there's an educated consumer, which is the reason why we're here today, to educate the community that on one hand, there are issues in every product, and reading an ingredient panel, even by people like us who do this all day, we don't necessarily understand what that means and doesn't give us a full picture. Certainly people who are not doing this all day and are not professionals cannot make that assumption. And moreover, now that you've understood that, it's your job to go to the, why do products get the OU? Why do products get any extra? They don't get an extra because they like us. They don't get an extra because, they want to get a certificate signed by Rabbi Genak. They get the OU because it represents sales. It represents sales. I mean, every time I speak publicly, I like to say the story of Mars. The OU, for years and years, never certified any Mars candy products, even though Mars is today, I think, either the largest candy company, certainly in the United States. Then we began to certify the M&Ms. And the reason we started certifying the M&Ms was not because Mars wanted the OU all of a sudden. Just many ice creams, not called Yisroel, but many ice creams have in them M&M pieces. And those ice cream companies were OU certified, and they were telling Mars, we insist that the M&Ms be kosher because our entire line is kosher, and we want to have these ice creams kosher as well. So M&Ms, because that's what their customers wanted, Mars got M&Ms certified. Not much longer, Mars was up in our office requesting certification on as much as they could get certified. And up till this very day, which is quite a few years, Mars is an excellent company. We enjoy a wonderful relationship with Mars. Unfortunately, most of the Rabbanim in our office can't eat the product because it's not called Yisroel. But we enjoyed a wonderful relationship with Mars. And we asked them, what happened? You never wanted to have OU supervision, and all of a sudden now you want it. And they said because after the M&Ms became certified, we got so many calls from the community on that 800 number on the back of the package saying, thank you for becoming kosher. So we saw, and the word they used was an incredible word. They saw the reaction was passionate. So they said, if that's what our customers want, that's what we'll do. And the exact same thing happens in any product. If the community wants, obviously nobody should ask, bread should be kosher Pesach. It's going to be hard to make it. But if there's a rice product or other products that maybe aren't certifiable for people who are makbid on kitniyot, but are certifiable for people who are not makbid on that many, you tell the company. You tell your shopkeeper to tell the salesman that you want it certified. And don't buy it if it doesn't have a supervision for Pesach, or don't buy it unless you're wrong. And we actually have a very good relationship with many of the Rabbanim from this community who are very careful and very knowledgeable about kashrus. We speak to them quite often. Unless your Rabbanim are telling you that this product, even if it doesn't have the certification for Pesach, can be used, then you shouldn't use it. Because making an assumption that this is some sort of a racism, and therefore we can make an assumption that it's kosher, local and kidney, is just wrong. It's just wrong, and it shouldn't be done. Now, one more question I think Rabbi Grossman asked was about the chametz-free status. Yes, there are products that are in our guide. I see we have some here that are what we call in the gray section, which are products that are always kosher Pesach. Those products are always kosher Pesach. We have stuff like water or regular coffee, not decaffeinated. Those products are always kosher Pesach. They're always kosher Pesach.
Ground coffee.
Ground coffee. Ground coffee. Those are products that are always kosher Pesach. Anything else, yes, you can call us, and if we'll know if a product is it's only kidneys and nothing else, we'll be happy to tell you, but it's hard to know unless there's real supervision. The rabbi brings up a point which is very important. When I used to speak at these forums years ago, I was a young man. Now I'm not a young man anymore. But when we grew up, a lot of the products that the OU now is certifying, a lot of people probably not everybody in this audience, but a lot of the people here ate without a hashgacha. And they ate based on the assumption that we looked on the ingredient panel. And that's why, I remember a year ago, we OU certified Tootsie Roll. And it was a lot of news in the community that we were starting to certify Tootsie Rolls. And a lot of people said, we ate Tootsie Rolls years ago, but it didn't have a hefsher. So it's not such a big simcha. But you know what? When we went to certify Tootsie Roll, we noticed that there were things that needed hashgacha that didn't have hashgacha. And we didn't even certify all the products that Tootsie Roll makes. So if there's ever an example, and we see this constantly, where there are products that maybe when all of us were younger, we ate on the assumption, because we looked at the ingredient panel, and the ingredient panel looked fine. And then when we went in, because the company actually requested supervision, we noticed that it wasn't so simple, and things had to be changed, and that there are ingredients, even if they have to be kosher, it was only because we were lucky that they were kosher, but not necessarily because the company was insisting on them being kosher. And an ingredient panel tells you very little, because every product almost has flavors in them. You don't know what that flavor is. You don't know there are numerous ingredients in every flavor. And it only takes one ingredient to make the product not kosher. And again, there are a lot of dairy ingredients that people who are not knowledgeable would not notice that they're dairy, but they're really dairy. I mean, years ago, was very involved with Nestle. And Nestle makes a very popular product called Dinnermints, after Dinnermints. And as I understand, it's made actually in England. It's made in a factory in York. And as I understand, in the most Haredisha homes in Europe, particularly in England, the minute is that Friday night after the Seder, they eat these Nestle after 8 dinners. When we went to see the factory, we have a very prominent mashgiach living that works for us who lives in Manchester. His name is Dr. Matt Meyer, a PhD from MIT, and he noticed that they put into all of these after 8 dinners that everybody was eating after their Fleischiger Friday night meal, they put in butter oil. And the reason they put in butter oil is because you see this is the time of the year where everybody gets a lot of chocolate after the Shabbos Mono. If you leave the chocolate around for a while, it gets white, loses its color. And they discovered that by putting in the butter oil, you could stop the coloration and the chocolate. It's really science about it comes from humidity, and the butter oil is able to counteract that humidity. So here we had a product that everybody was eating. It's bittersweet chocolate, it's dark chocolate, and a mint filling. What could be wrong with it? And they were all eating it militants after their Friday night meat meal. So if you ask why does the product need supervision, I think that's a great example.
Rabbi Elephant. Rabbi Genak, a few questions about the Bishul Yisroel. Number one, is every OU product Bishul Yisroel? Is there any way of knowing whether a product is Bishul Yisroel according to Sephardic requirements? How can an Ashkenazi restaurant provide for the Bishul Yisroel requirements of a Sephardic Jew? And one person asked the question here, if an OU product says Bishul Yisroel, can we assume it's Bishul Yisroel for Sephardim? And the fifth question, can a Sephardic person eat in a restaurant or a fair which only has Bishul Yisroel according to Ashkenazi?
Well, in terms of OU products generally, obviously, if anything bears an OU, it means that it's kosher. And if it's Bishul Ako, we just put it in reverse, it means it's not kosher. So, is everything Bishul Yisroel? Those things that require Bishul Yisroel, namely, it has to be products that are Ola Shulch Malachim, that are not Nechel to Moshe Chai. But if it falls into that category, then it means it's Bishul Yisroel. But the Bishul Yisroel that we're dealing with does not necessarily mean that it meets the standard of the Mechaber, that it has to be that the Jew actually did the cooking. It could be that we relied on the Jew lit the fire or some other consideration. How that affects Sephardim who follow the Shechita Mechaber, the chuvas that Rabbi Yosef has about hotels in Israel, in which where the chefs are not necessarily Jewish, where he's makel. I don't know that he's makel chatchila, but he's makel because he says you can be somewhere on other snifim. Among the other snifim he has is a sign from Amor that if they're schirim, which they are, they're paid, so therefore they're not doing it because it's not an indication of camaraderie or affection. If it's owned by Jews, Malone, for example, maybe that's considered the Beit Yisroel, the Rabbi, not the Rabbi, but the Rabbi, according to Tosfos. There are other snifim that he says that b'shas hatzorach you can rely on. Many of those snifim are applicable in our restaurants, but not necessarily all. So the system that we have set up is not necessarily possible to accommodate all the chumrah, the mechaber related to Bishul Yisroel. And that's true in terms of companies. We have to just have a proper perspective in companies. We often get questions from not so much Bishul Yisroel, but when I speak in Borough, this is the norm. Why don't you make all your products Chol Yisroel? Shows such triumphalism, I think. We don't own, this may be a chiddush, we don't own all the companies in the United States. It just reminds me of the joke they say about two guys, two Jews go to the library. Yaakov sees that his friend, Beryl, he's reading, he takes this anti-Semitic man and he's reading it all the time. He says, what are you reading? He says, I love to read this. When I read the New York Times, you always see so and so and so. I read here, I see the Jews on the banks. We are there, it's a Mechayim. So, but depends, I guess, which one you subscribe to. So, the concept behind the OU, which really was an extraordinary concept, was to try to make the basic products, first the basic ingredients, so that it's the foundation that everything else can be built on. Basic emulsifiers, oils, and so on, that they're kosher. And then the OU means in most of its products, most of our products we're dealing with are not those that are especially kosher sensitive, like meat or wine or cheese, that require specific requirements. But we make sure that all the ingredients that are going in are kosher. And therefore a Jew, any place in the breadth of the United States and even beyond, can keep kosher at the same price. We spoke before about the tuition prices at the same cost that he's paying for other products. That anybody in the general population is paying. That was the concept behind the OU, and I think it was successful because the breadth of its reach. But the standards that we have in place are genuine standards. It's not a b'diavad standard that we're relying on. We're relying on what's required by PD. But in terms of, Chol Yisroel, so we're relying on those shitas, which are, frankly, low cost, the Yesh Mother to be mafkir, the shita, some certain others, but Chodesh and others, we're relying on that. My point is, there's a basis for it. There's a strong halakhic basis. So that's what we do. And therefore, in terms of coming back, in terms of Bishul Yisroel, what we do is, what we think is a possible and appropriate standard in terms of most of the products that we're giving. Those things that require many products that we give, I just want to point out, are not, we consider them not to be Ola Shech Malacha, or they're not Moshe Chai, but for example, junk food, what I call junk food as clothes, many of those products are, we don't consider them to be Ola Shech Malacha. There's a discussion about that for those who do, sometimes at least others otherwise. Or many of them, baked goods are paspal. So you can't presume if you're, that you have a right to presume anything that's under the OU is kosher, and therefore requires that you be Yisroel, it will be Yisroel. That will necessarily be the Bishul Yisroel standard of the mechaber. That the Jew actually did the cooking, not just lying in the fire, that's not necessarily the case.
Why do some products say Bishul Yisroel? It's not what the mechaber, the OU is.
Right. So it's not, a lot of these things that say Bishu Yisroel, the OU doesn't, it's not the OU putting that out. Those are, it's the Chassidish Ashkafas or something superimposed or others who are doing it. And it'll, but the Bishu Yisroel, I'll give, for example, even Parva, right? Much more innocuous. We don't like Parva in terms of OU. That's, if it says Parva, it should be Parva. But it's not the OU saying like Parva. When we just have an OU by itself without an OUD, you can, and if the nose, we actually get to look at the no dairy meetings in the panel, but generally speaking, the OU by itself implies that it's Parva.
Rabbi Belsky, still on the Shechita's Beit Yosef. Does a Sephardi, a few questions, does a Sephardi have an obligation to only eat Beit Yosef? Then someone wrote, I heard there's a difference between eating Beit Yosef in one's home and eating out. Is that correct? Can a Sephardi Beit Yosef meat cook in a pot that used glut kosher meat? And the final question, do the numbers work? If you would figure out the amount of animals slaughtered and the percent of possible Beit Yosef, how is it possible there is so much Beit Yosef meat produced?
I don't know how to respond to any of those questions. You want me to be the basic for the Sephardi community and tell you what Sephardim should be eating and what Sephardim shouldn't be eating. You have Baruch Hashem, Rabbanim, and Del Paskin, and decide what
As an
what should
outsider,
be done. No, you can't. If you want me to Paskin how to take Trumas and Meisters in Yisroel, and go to the Yisroel Rabbanim who are authorities in Trumas and Meisters, but here it's much, much different. Just to tell Sephardim what to do, they know what's being offered to them is better safe or glad. I said before that the father should definitely look for Shechita Beit Yosef. And the glad is not 100% guaranteed to be Beit Yosef. Maybe some places they are, but unless it's advertised as such, and there's a reliable authority saying that it's so that you trust, then you can't assume so. I don't think I have anything.
At least in a restaurant that has OU, what can they assume? Can they assume that when you have to meet, can they assume that people are Yisroel, right?
What?
Yeah, but that's definitely
Okay. I want to. What was the number of these questions? The parts, yeah. It's the same thing. If you want to be machmir in the Shechita Beit Yosef, Beit Yosef did not accept Micha Mishmash or Kiluf at all. Okay? And if you think that this particular process doesn't fall within the category of what's acceptable to the Beit Yosef, then you shouldn't eat not just the food, but even if it's cooked in that pot.
I assume there's no...
But if it's already cooked, so in the home, you could assume that so it was cooked in a pot that wasn't used. People don't cook and use the pots every single day. In a restaurant, the pots are used every single day. And they could, in the factory, the kettle are used in 2 or 3 shifts, constantly throughout the day and throughout the night. So you can't say, Stam Kelem and Nayono, but what you at a home, they're not for Nayono. That you could assume, but you treat it, most of the, if you're with Dardik and Shechita Beit Yosef, then you should be medagdik all the way into the cave. I would like to just throw in one mashu that I feel should be stressed in relation to the idea of hashkafat kidneys. What Rabbi Yosef said is absolutely very basic and very important. What we need are people who are born to generate an interest in it. We need also something, Rabbi said, we need businessmen to go out and be ready to invest money in it. Because We had for years rice that was made without any enrichment at all. There are owners of big rice companies who made special runs without enrichment. Maybe they should put some other kind of enrichment which would satisfy government requirement, but they made for us special runs, but they were left to the places. Nobody would buy them, nobody would distribute them. We tried to make an advertising campaign and fell on deaf ears, because this illusion that you could just take any product off the shelf, because if you eat kidneys, then you could eat anything, but of course it's the most foolish assumption in the world, because it's going very clearly for we need people who are willing to invest, and for that we need the community, because if a guy's going to put down a nice hefty sum of money and fill up a store and a distribution center with products, and no store will buy it, no individuals will buy it, so he's going to be left with all that stuff. And they wouldn't buy it after Pesach as well. It's just going to be considered, and that's what happened. That's what they told us. People told us one afternoon who invested money in it, that after this, and I'm not going to try again. I was left hanging with $10,000 worth of stuff, and I'm not going to do it anymore. Now, the B12 enrichment is the least what be the B12, because B12 is 1 part per million. It's such tiny amounts that I don't think anyone has any question. First of all, I want to tell you, the enrichment on the rice is sprayed on the outside of the rice. It's not absorbed into the rice. And when you cook with rice which has enrichment, you're creating a tarofet on Pesach. You're not taking something which is bottle and then choice of veneer. Most places can assume that the mechaber says that it's not. We don't know if choice of veneer, even though he brings both days, but it's the assumption that when the mechaber brings 2 days, it means the first one, not the second one. Chacham Avadia says that the minute was always to say that it's not choice of veneer. But that's not what I'm worried about. On rice and the other products, stuff is on the surface. And if it's on the surface, there's no tarofet. And when you're cooking it on Pesach, you're creating a new tarofet. It's not the B12, no. It's the B1 and 2 and 3 and 6, all the B's.
The thiamine also.
What?
The thiamine.
Thiamine is B2. Niacin.
No, that one was discovered in Japan.
No,
the chief into the factory in Japan.
In Japan, but the chief source for the B vitamins is bran of wheat. That's the chief source. It always say you don't have to say B, any B's on the label. You say niacin, thiamine, riboflavin. Those are B. 1, 2, 3, and 6. Those are the common vitamins. And then sometimes they call them B number this, and sometimes they call them by those other very, very familiar names. And you know, there's a history behind it. Why is it that the government requires enrichment? They discovered vitamins. The whole idea that vitamins are essential to life. The rich people in China were all dying from diseases. They found this because they ate polished rice, because the bran was removed. And all the vitamins were in the bran. And they examined the bran and they found all these different things. At first they thought it was just one vitamin, they called it B. One later they broke it down and did years of research. And now we have all these vitamins. But the bran of rice and of wheat, and I don't think they get their wheat in the United States from rice bran. They get it from wheat bran. It's probably all pure hummus, but there's just a little tiny amount. But I don't think that you could say it's any choice of veneer. It's cooking it on place. It's a very serious question. But the larger question, which Rabbi Elfin spoke about so beautifully, is all of the products. when you don't know what's in a product, it could contain all kinds of different things. And you just say, well, I'm an oichel kidneys, and I could go ahead and eat it because I'm not tied to the stringent chumras of it. It's not true. You can't eat the product without hashgacha. All the assumptions that were made in the time of Chazal, everything with life was much simpler. In the time of Chazal, they said, period. It was mutter. Today, how can you take a product coming from India? And they have the Indian boys, they regulate, they treat the cows a little different than we would have. They take every sunless and put it in the everything that ends up with garbage.
Thank you, Belsky. Rabbi Elfin, what are the main questions one should ask and the answers one should receive in determining that a restaurant has a good hashgacha? Whereas normally a person would ask his Rav, can he eat in a certain restaurant? Let's say he couldn't reach his Rav, he's in a situation where he has to be in a certain restaurant. What can give him the comfort level that he's eating in a place where the hashgacha is a good hashgacha? And I assume that part of that the answer will be nogeya that there's OU mashgichim tamidim in every restaurant. And someone asked the question, why doesn't the OU of mashgichim tamidim constant supervision in every factory? Doesn't the OU trust the goyim? Is there a difference between factories and restaurants?
Right, so let's first talk about the restaurants, then we'll talk about the factories. I think the first question that one should always ask when he goes to eat in a restaurant is who is the Rav or who is the organization supervising that establishment. And although Rabbi Grossman said, well, if you don't know and your Rav is not available, so then you have to make your own decision, I think if your Rav is not available and you don't know, you shouldn't go to the restaurant. Nobody will go hungry in America if you don't eat in that restaurant. So if you don't know who's giving you hashgacha, don't make your own decisions. Having said that, I think it is only fair that we should mention what are the OU standards in giving hashgacha to restaurants. And obviously, as Rabbi Genek spoke about earlier, these standards were established firstly based on what the halacha is, and secondly based on years of experience in supervising restaurants, which are actually probably the hardest type of supervision that we're involved with. I would say that the two most important factors involved in giving hashgacha to a restaurant or to a caterer or to a food service establishment are, number one, and I'm probably going in proper order, is who owns the establishment and who's the person running the restaurant or the caterer. Because the best mashgiach and the best hashgacha does not have enough eyes and does not have enough locks to control the situation. And therefore, if the person who runs or owns that establishment is a person who's not trustworthy, is a person that doesn't respect what Hilchos Kashrus represent, then such a person should not receive supervision. And even if he does receive supervision, people who are really serious about kashrus should not eat in such establishments. That's, I think, the first thing that you should look at. Having said that, we've now established that the proprietor is a reliable individual, still, he's not giving the hashgacha. The hashgacha is given by the Rabbanim or the organization who's giving the hashgacha. And as Rabbi Genek said earlier, the first requirement that we have in restaurants, and actually we have this requirement both in B'sari and Chalavi, in meat and dairy restaurants, is that there should be a mashgiach tamidi. And the definition of a mashgiach tamidi is as the word tamidi implies. Tamidi, all the time. Like in their tongue, it's on all the time, not just some of the time. Tamidi means all the time. Tamidi means that he's there when the restaurant opens, and he's there, and he's the one that has the locks. At least he has the keys to the area where the cooking is taking place. If there's a front room where the tables are, and the people just setting up the tables and cleaning the floor, and there's no cooking and nothing can be done in that area, so that's not that important. But he should have the key and be the one that opens up the kitchen area, and he should be the person that locks it at night. and not say, well, they finished serving all of the food, and they're just cleaning up the kitchen now, and there may be guests that are remaining here because they're part of a party or whatever, and I want to get home. No, he has to remain till the end. And that's the definition of Hashgacha Tamidus. And of course, the person who is the Mashgiach Tamidi has to be a person, firstly, who's a Yirei Shamayim, first who, when he sees something, will say something, or not just saying that, it's not a big deal. And of course, it's a person that has to be knowledgeable in the halacha, and to know what is a question, what isn't a question. Because unlike many factories, just to jump to the last question that Yosef mentioned, that don't really change. Restaurants are a very dynamic situation. Menus change, customers' requests change, suppliers change. You're running an affair and you see that you're missing something. So you don't need a truckload of flour. You need a bag of something. And you can send a worker down the block to the supermarket to pick up whatever you're missing. But the person you're sending around the corner, even if he has no bad intention, there was a story in Barbach, I think a year or two ago, under a very reliable Hashgacha, where they ran out of Frankfurters, and there was no intention by the owner to do anything wrong. He just sent his worker to go around the corner, because he thought, in Barbach, there were only kosher grocery stores. Go buy a package of Frankfurters, or 2 packages that we should have. But there's also non-kosher grocery stores to the left. And that's where this guy went, and that's where he bought the non-kosher Frankfurters. So nobody meant to do anything wrong, but something terrible happened. And that's why you need a Mashgiach Tamidi, because in a restaurant, it's constantly changing. It's a very, very dynamic environment, unlike a factory. And a reliable, good Mashgiach that has his eyes, and sometimes, in fact, we have such restaurants, not many, but we have restaurants that have more than one Mashgiach. So let's say they're cooking on more than one floor. Certainly, as we come towards Pesach, and there are hotels, Baruch Hashem, doesn't really do many of those hotels. But there are hotels that are certified for Pesach, and many people go to these hotels. It's crucial that a guest go, if he's not going to have Pesach at home and he's going to those hotels, has to know who's the Hashgacha and has to know the right questions. Who are the Mashgiachim? How many Mashgiachim? Does the kitchen, in the OU, as I said, doesn't really certify many hotels for Pesach, but we would never certify a hotel for Pesach that's also cooking chametz or treif in another kitchen in the same hotel. It's a recipe for disaster. There's stories where there were hashgachas, again, not the OU, reliable hashgachas, that certified cruises. A lot of people like to take kosher cruises. Well, there's never been a boat, because these boats are huge, they're cities, that's been completely kosher. So you're out at sea, people have spent thousands of dollars to be guests on this cruise. The kosher kitchen runs out of something. There we can't even send the mashgiach around the corner to buy something. Around the corner in the middle of the ocean. So what does he do? He'll have the trading kitchen right next door. And he's looking to satisfy his guests. It's a recipe for disaster. How many days before Pesach do the mashgiachim get access to the kitchen to kasher the kitchen? All of us who are staying home for Pesach know that our wives are already cleaned out for Pesach, and it's 3-4 weeks before Yom Tov. And a week before Yom Tov, you can't bring chametz into the house. And the kitchen is already Pesach day. So, and that's a small kitchen that's feeding how many people? Here you have a huge kitchen that you need to kasher, that's going to be feeding hundreds and maybe thousands of people, and you get it a day before Yom Tov to kasher? Those are the kind of questions that you should ask. And I don't think I'm able to come up with all the questions, and respectfully, I don't think anybody in this room is able to come up with all the questions. So therefore, the best answer is to work with a reliable hashgacha that you know has the right standards in giving that hashgacha.
The last set of questions was about Genak. Number one, is there a difference between OU in America and OU in Israel? Can OUD be considered Chol Yisroel? And finally, I think there's a mistake in this question, but we'll state it anyway. Why did the OU change dairy utensils to the same symbol as dairy OUD? It helps Spartan when it's marked DE like before. Would you consider adding it back?
Well, first of all, in terms of the first question, the OU in Israel is also under the aegis of the OU generally. So the standards there are generally the same as the United States. I mentioned one exception, and that is we supervise a few restaurants, and Midigan Yisroel, which is something that we don't do here in the United States, is that the wine that's served, the people who pour it for you, if you ask from giving mashgiach, from waiter or waitress, but generally what they do is they give the person a closed bottle, so they open it on their own, and some of the wines are not kosher. In the United States, we accept it, and I think appropriately, that all the wines that are served in establishments are